Today we're taking a look at all the latest NHL trade and free agent rumors, focusing on teams like the New Jersey Devils, Calgary Flames, Winnipeg Jets, and a few others. Could Dustin Byfuglien possibly return? And we have the latest on the top remaining free agent on the market, Mike Hoffman. We'll discuss all the latest coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a variety of things to talk about here today from a variety of teams around the league. A couple quick news tidbits here before we get too deep into the news and rumor video section of this video. One, Julius Honka is making his NHL return. He signed a one-year, two-way contract with the Dallas Stars. Of course, he was one of a couple RFAs last year who ended up not signing and sitting out the entire NHL season, playing over in Europe, just like we saw with Jesse Puljujarvi. And of course, he's returned as well. So Honka returns to the Stars, will fight for another opportunity to make their roster. And it's a two-way deal, which is obviously goes to show that, really there wasn't much leverage on his part to look for a better contract, and which caused him to miss all of last year in the NHL. But obviously with where the Stars are after a long run, probably made it more appealing to return. And we'll see if he can crack that lineup and find himself a regular spot. Now, another quick other news update as well concerning Dallas is that Tyler Seguin could miss significant time depending on when the NHL season gets underway. Tyler Seguin has been dealing with a lot of injuries that we found out at the end of the playoffs, and one does require a fairly big surgery, and it's a hip problem that he's having, and it's a 4-month recovery. The surgery has not taken place yet because of everything going on with COVID and the restrictions and, surgeries being delayed in some areas. He has not had the surgery as of yet, but they're hoping to get an update here in the next week or so. So he could be looking to have that soon, depending on when the season starts. If we're looking at, say, January, that would only give him around 2 months or a little bit less to recover, and it's a 4-month recovery. So he could miss, we'll say, 1 to 2 months of the season. It just really boils down to the start date, which we don't know, and we don't know the exact surgery date either. So it could be something that the Dallas Stars are going to be in a position to be able to use some long-term injury reserve for salary cap relief to start the season, like some other teams. And it could also mean that they're without one of their top players, which could be, a significant blow to start off, possibly a little bit slow here if they're losing one of their top offensive weapons. But they proved in the playoffs that even without Seguin really playing at his best, based on everything he went through, that they could still be a very successful team. So we'll see if they can carry that on. Now, one item that we talked about, I believe it was last week or so sometime, about Dale Talon possibly being hired by the Pittsburgh Penguins. We know after he was in the process of leaving the Florida Panthers, there were some accusations that he was accused of making some racial remarks or slurs during the early part of the 2020 NHL Stanley Cup playoffs in the bubble in Toronto. We did get comments finally from the NHL indicating that he was investigated and cleared of all those accusations. So they found nothing. There was nobody else to corroborate the story, or they could not find enough evidence to suggest that he was guilty. So at this point, we kind of wanted to clear his name and kind of go forth from there. So if he does get hired by the Penguins or anywhere else, he won't have that following him around. Hopefully nothing else comes up in that regards regarding him or really anybody else around the NHL as well. Arguably the top free agent out there right now is Mike Hoffman, and we had comments from his agent indicating that they're willing to be extremely patient. I think he feels that could still be a big payoff for Hoffman to not panic here and take a smaller contract than he might feel he deserves. I mean, we've heard all along that teams like Nashville and Columbus, and to a degree even Boston, has been in the mix as well. Possibility about returning back to Florida. He's looking for a contract somewhere near $6 million. Willing to accept a one-year deal. A proven 28 to 30 goal guy on a consistent basis. Has really been nothing but consistent. I realize outside of his offensive production, defensively, he's not really the greatest player. You're not going to get a 200-foot game out of Hoffman. He's really good in the power play. But still, an extra 25 to 30 goals in your lineup is not going to hurt. And that's what typically players get paid the big bucks for. So he's kind of waiting for his best opportunity. Now, it makes sense. If you take a look at some of these teams, if he is patient to the point that he's even willing to wait up until training camp, and that's the way his agent made it sound, these teams will start to use long-term injury reserve, ones that are tight up against the cap, that might have a better shot at being a more successful team, a cup contender. Obviously, there's going to be teams dipping into LTIR because of injuries that we're already aware of, plus other things could happen during off-season training or even during training camp itself. So if you look at teams like St. Louis, for example, with Tarasenko expected to go on long-term injury reserve, you've got the Bruins with Pasternak and Marchand, some flexibility there. You get the Oilers with Oscar Klefbom. I just mentioned Tyler Seguin in Dallas. So there could be more teams open up more space by utilizing that, not really loophole, but I guess that advantage when they have players in that kind of situation. Now, it doesn't solve things long term because none of these guys that we've mentioned are really, outside of maybe Klefbom, expected to miss the entire season, but it still could buy them enough time to get into the NHL season that they could move around some other contracts and money to make things work longer term. But Hoffman could very well prove that patience is a virtue here, but at the same time could also prove that patience created no opportunity. It just really boils down to how things shake out. But at this point, considering we're over 4 weeks into free agency here, and he hasn't signed yet, I think that's proof that they're willing to be extremely patient. There's always a possibility that one of these other teams, like Nashville or the Blue Jackets, who do have space, come back and ante up their offer. Then maybe he'll take a deal and get it done with. But a team like Columbus is want to get Dubois locked up first and know where that contract lands before they really probably do anything additional. Nashville, on the other hand, doesn't really have much in the way of other business to take care of, so they'd be the main team to watch that I would think would have that better opportunity getting something done sooner rather than later. But like I said, those other teams I mentioned would come into the mix too, unless he's willing to go to another team like the Devils or the Red Wings. I doubt he would ever go back to Ottawa, but teams like that would have enough cap space that he could just sign a good contract, $5-6 million, and be done with it and deal with things again in a year's time. But lots of interest out there, just a matter of showing him the money to make him sign on the dotted line, and patience will be used as much as he can here to get what he wants. So we'll see, and we could be watching this Hoffman situation for several more weeks, possibly even months. Could Dustin Byfuglien return to the NHL? Now, it seems pretty unlikely at this point, but there was a recent interview by his agent with Michael Russo, who covers Minnesota, and there's certainly some talk there basically from him saying that the ideal situation would have to open up to Byfuglien. A team like the Minnesota Wild would be probably the only team that might be able to convince him to come out of retirement, because even though he hasn't officially announced his retirement, he basically is, and that considering how long he hasn't played. But he said, he loves to go hunting and fishing, and he's got a young family. He's from that area. So, if there was any chance of Buff coming back, the Wild's probably the only ones that can make it happen. I didn't indicate whether or not they've actually had talks with him in the past, because there was some rumblings before that they did kind of touch base, and there wasn't a whole lot of interest there. But we've heard from several of Byfuglien's teammates before indicating they would be surprised based on what they know of the situation if he came back. He's been laid off from the game now for so long that it would be really difficult, I think, for him to come back and be an impact player. But for a team to take a chance on him on a short-term cheap contract with all that experience he has, and what if he comes close to what he was used to be, then that still would be a great pickup. So could the Wild come knocking on his door to see if they can bring him back to the NHL? Maybe, but if they haven't done so already, I'm going to say it's probably pretty doubtful, and more likely Byfuglien doesn't come back. But according to his agent, they're about the only team who would really stand a chance to even come close to making it happen. Now, when it comes to the Winnipeg Jets, there's still talk that they'd really like to have an upgrade on the left side of their blue line, and that even though they signed defenseman Sami Niku, that he could still be packaged with a guy like Jack Roslovic, who's rumored to be frustrated with his inability to get a consistent top six spot. Those two players very well could bring a pretty solid left shot D back. Now, of course, on the left side they have Josh Morrissey, so they need somebody who can play that number 2 slot. Ideally, they still could use another right shot defenseman as well, because they're still in the process of kind of rebuilding that blue line here. But ideally, a top 4 defenseman is something that would be a pretty valuable piece to the Winnipeg Jets. We haven't heard much more talk on the Patrick Laine front lately, so if Laine were traded, depending on what came back, would certainly determine if Roslovic could get an elevated role or not. So I do understand from these two players' perspectives, especially from Roslovic, that he would want more of a chance. Now, in the case of Niku, it's been clear from his agent that they were not requesting a trade and have not gone down that road at all, although I'm sure that he probably would want more of a chance too. So it's still talk out there that could certainly be a possibility. Now, if you look at the free agent market, though, there is some interesting names that are still possibly out there on the left and right side. Like, for example, they could look to a guy like Travis Hamonic, who's out there. And I can't help but wonder if a guy like Hamonic, with all that experience, pretty good defenseman, that maybe where he didn't return to the NHL bubble, he's one of the few players that didn't participate. Could that have hurt his value and our team shying away because of it? I can't say for sure that it is. It just seems weird that he's still out there in free agency. So I couldn't help but wonder if maybe that was having an impact. I don't know. But there's also a guy out there like Sami Vatanen as well who could be a potential guy for them to look at. So the Jets don't necessarily have to package players up here to do this by trade. It could be done by free agency as well. But they might be able to get themselves a higher quality defenseman if they go down the trade route, because there's not a lot out there right now that's left on the free agent market. So could we see another move from Kevin Cheveldayoff? Wouldn't surprise me. Not sure it's going to be the blockbuster deal we've been talking about or maybe hinting towards here over the last number of weeks, but some acquisition to enhance their blue line seems pretty possible at this point. Now, speaking of defensemen, there's also talk that the Calgary Flames are interested in bringing in another right-shot defenseman, probably another depth forward as well. The defenseman that they're looking for would likely not be through free agency and likely through trade for a combination of reasons. There's just not much out there, it appears, on the market that they would like. I mean, they could bring back Travis Hamonic, but it doesn't seem like there's interest to do that. And they also are very limited on cap space, so something would have to be traded out to make room for this new player coming in as well. Now, finding a right-shot defenseman that's available for a good price is not something that's easy to do. Right-shot defensemen are certainly a highly coveted piece around the NHL that general managers don't really like to give up. But if you take a look around, it wouldn't necessarily have to be somebody that's a high-profile right-shot defenseman. It very well could be somebody who could be more of a second to third pair, like, maybe like a 5-6 guy on your depth chart, that type of deal. But the Flames certainly have some pieces that could be moved. There's still some talk. Could Sam Bennett be a trade piece? His regular seasons haven't been great, but his playoffs have been pretty decent. So still some talk about that future. And so they also, the forward they would be looking to bring in likely would be a winger, because they want to improve their wing depth to be able to allow more of an opportunity for Elias Lindholm to play center ice. Now, to me, if they get Lindholm playing center, you already got Monahan, you get Backlund. That creates a pretty solid 1-2-3 here down the middle. And depending on how things go, we just talk about Monahan-Gaudreau tandem might be broken up at some point. One or both could be traded sometime, and hard to say exactly when. It's been talked about for a long time. I still think Gaudreau would be the more likely one to go, but if Lindholm could become that top center, and then of course you have Backlund as well, might be a case where Monahan becomes more of a trade piece. But either way, I think it's more about creating more depth. But when you do that, it kind of creates more question marks. You kind of see things that you might not have had before for opportunities when it comes to making trades. So look for the Flames to possibly add some extra depth on the wing and try to find a right shot defenseman, likely through trade, with something going out. It doesn't have to be anything too significant here in this case, but I think Brad Treliving's pretty happy so far here with his offseason. It's just a matter of kind of rounding things out and adding a little extra depth. I'm not sure they can pluck any more from the Vancouver Canucks. We know Calgary's gotten a lot of free agents from them. At this point, I can't imagine a trade would take place either, but it's just been funny how so many of the Canuck players have ended up in Calgary. A few days ago, we talked about the possibility of a New Jersey Devils offer sheet. I just wanted to touch on that a little bit further and take a look at some of the other targets. We mostly talked about Matthew Barzal in that video, and what the possibilities could be. To do a Barzal offer sheet, you're probably looking at upwards of $9 million at least. Probably not that very top tier where you have to give up 4 first-round picks, but the one right below it where you can give up 2 firsts, a second, and a third. That's something that I just don't see happening. I think Lou would match that and with the Islanders, and I just don't see that being their prime choice. I think if the Devils are going to do an offer sheet, it's going to be something a little bit lower key, and if they're going to target anybody, I would think the boys in Tampa would probably be the most likely, starting with Mikhail Sergachev or Anthony Cirelli. Either of those players would be fantastic additions to the New Jersey Devils, but if you look around the NHL and other top RFAs, that would be interesting to at least think about. You've got Pierre-Luc Dubois in Columbus, but I think they're in a well-positioned in a situation to match, so I'm not really sure that would really be worth their while. Same thing goes for Anthony Mantha in Detroit. Detroit's also got lots of cap space, so if they want to keep Mantha, that would not be an issue. But a couple other RFAs that would be interesting to think about for New Jersey as well, that might not cost so much, would be a player like Ethan Bear in Edmonton. The Oilers are tight up against the cap. They probably would like to keep him. Of course, most teams would prefer to keep their RFAs, but still, it could be a great defenseman who's still young, up and coming, to add to the Devils' blue line. And you've also got Rupe Hintz in Dallas, who's yet to be signed. And the Stars are starting to get tight on space after getting deals done with their other RFAs. And of course, Rupe is a pretty young, exciting player as well, the forward position. Could certainly help add some much-needed depth to New Jersey. So between Rube Hintz and Ethan Bear and the two guys in Tampa, Cirelli and Sergachev, you can throw a Chernak in there as well, but a little bit less likely. Those would be your most likely targets. Of course, what we had talked about with New Jersey, in case you missed that video, was Mike Fuda, who's the former assistant GM in Los Angeles, who was working for Sportsnet over the case of the NHL draft and doing some media work, actually talked about the fact that when he interviewed for the job as New Jersey Devils general manager, that they were real big on the offer sheet and kept talking about how they really wanted to do one, and he revealed this, afterwards, which was, certainly kind of a little bit skeptical. I'm sure New Jersey wasn't real pleased with that, but it could impact his ability to get other interviews, I would think, down the road. But regardless, it's something that he leaked, and it's an interesting concept given the fact that New Jersey has the cap space. They have some picks that they can throw at players in form of compensation to do this type of thing. And they're an up-and-coming young team here, so be interesting to see if they do this. Like I said, I would think they would probably target their blue line myself between guys like Bear or Sergachev, but Sergachev probably being the number one target. But be interesting to see if they do, in fact, do this, because there are still some pretty high-profile RFAs out there on the market. So let me know your thoughts on that and everything else discussed here today down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. And give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.